For today, we we move on from where we were. We will do a bit of a recap and as well learn a few new functions. And I also want to spend a good section of this lesson specifically focusing on shortcuts, giving you a summary of several shortcuts as we learn new content as well. So I'll share my screen. So what I have here is a simple worksheet. So we will use this to do a bit of a recap of some of the things we have already learned, but as well we will use it to learn a few new things. So we'll talk about percentages, for example. You're familiar with addition, subtraction, and that type of thing, but we'll introduce percentages, we'll introduce some simple charts, as well as go through some conditional formula. Okay, so here I have a simple spreadsheet with some data. We could take this as employees of a small company somewhere. Okay, so I can rename this. Remember we said we can rename worksheets, so I can call this employee data, basic data. So what we want to start with is remind ourselves how we do percentages, or even before we do that, this looks rather plain, so we can do some formatting. Okay, so I want to first highlight that row, make it look better by making a title row bold. And also, I can move this out of the way and make this whole section. For the whole section, I apply some visible borders. So what I've done there is used the home tab, then I went to this border option and selected all borders. All borders applies borders to everything. So then I can also do some color coding for this section, which is what we will be focusing on. So I can put some soft green color there. Maybe the title all needs the same color. Let's make that dark red and make the text white. Okay, so it's starting to look more interesting. Right, so that's just a bit of formatting. So let's start with the allowance. We want to, this is some data about some people. Okay, there are some people in different departments. We have their first name, their staff ID. So what we want to work out is an allowance based on a percentage that we've been given. Okay, so we'll say these people get an allowance. Let's say it's a blanket allowance to start with. They all get 30%. And this basic pay, I know the numbers look small. Let's say this is basic pay in dollars. They're being paid in USD. So suppose the allowance everyone gets is 30%, well, let's make it 20% of their basic pay. How would we compute that? What formula would we use? Remember from last lesson, we said you need to remember a bit of your basic maths. So if we are getting 20% of 1,500, we will start with an equal sign like we start for all Excel formula and functions. Then we'll say 20%. So the good thing with Excel, there is a percent sign. So that is shift and 5. There are those of you who will want to do the long maths and do 20 over 100, which is the same as 20%. But because you're using Excel, you can do shift and the 5 key, so it will pick the percentage sign. Then for the times, remember it's shift and 8, then you want 20% of that. And remember, like from last time we said, we don't type the 1,500, we click on it instead. But because 20% is a constant in this case, we type it. So if I do that, I'll get this first person will get an allowance of 300. And we'll get some numbers there. It went beyond the range, so I want it only going up to here. Okay, so I've used autofill. You remember autofill from last lesson. So you just click on the board, on the cell that you're interested in, then point at this corner, okay, bottom right of the cell you've selected, then pull it downwards and you will autofill the formula. In other words, you will copy the formula to all the other cells. Okay, so which reminds me, suppose this constant, we wanted it, suppose it was given somewhere here. Let's say we had it in a cell here where which say allowance, then there was 20%. So we want to read it. So somewhere already listed on the worksheet you're working with. Okay, so we have something like that. Let me increase the font a bit so you can see. Suppose it was already stored somewhere, then they stored the tax as well. The tax, let's say, is 35%. So it is all already on the worksheet indicated, the rates. So how can we use this here? Okay, let's think about that for a moment. For now, we have just been typing the percentage directly and has been working by copying this value multiple times. And if you look, if I go down this, you can see the cell reference is changing. This is changing. It started at E2, moving on. Okay, but the 20% is remaining constant, which is what we want to happen when we click it from here. So for example, let me just use an example to illustrate what I'm saying. Suppose this was not here, and we wanted to calculate it based on this formula. So we want to do something like that. Click on this 20, then times this 1,500. If I press enter, the first answer looks very correct. Okay. The only challenge will come when I try to copy it downwards. Okay. So if you remember, this reference has been changing as we go down the selection. You see what's happening with the Ks. We started at K4, which is what has that 20%. For the second one, it goes to the 35%. It's referring to K5. And you'll notice from here, it becomes zeros because there is nothing here. It is the default value there is 0. Then by the time it gets here, it will even generate an error because it will try to do K14. K14 is the one that has that. So how do we make it stick to that 20? Okay, then here we use what is called absolute referencing. Okay, it's one of those shortcuts. For you to get the absolute referencing means we will lock the 20%. That cell reference will not move down. So we could do it manually by typing the dollar signs like this. Okay, so if I type those dollar signs, you'll notice it will work out the correct figure. So in other words, as I click down this range, you will notice that K4 is remaining constant, which is what we want to happen. So an alternative to typing those manually is to use a shortcut. If I highlight this K4 and press F4, the F4 key on your keyboard. If you're using a laptop, you might have to do function F4. F4 are those functions, or rather, when I say F, I mean the function keys at the top of your keyboard. It starts with the F1 all the way up to F12. On the machine I'm using, it goes up to F12. So when I press F4, it applies the absolute reference, and then that range will be locked. Right? So that's an important thing to remember. So suppose tax, let's use the same method to work out this tax. We want to start with an equal sign, click on the range, and we can press F4 at that point now that we know how to work with F4. Okay, 5, yeah, I have the right one. And F4, then we put a times, and then we click on this. But let's make it even more interesting. Suppose we are taxing even the allowances. We want to apply the tax to the allowances as well. At this point, we're only taxing the basic pay. So it gives us that. Let me erase this part. But we want a formula that will tax even the allowances. So we will have to do odd mass, we call. So I will need to add those two. So I've done that last sign, then click on this, and this will be 35% of the sum of those two. Does that make sense? So I've done E plus F, that gives you 1800, and we are getting 20% of that 1800. All right. So that's one way to do it, but you could also use a sum function. Just a bit of a recap of what we have done. If I put sum here and highlighted those two, you still work. So still get the same thing, only that here I've used the sum, and it, at first glance, it might look like a very intimidating formula, but if you understand the logic of it, then it makes sense, because sometimes you will need to include the sum of a given range and get some percentage of it. So it really makes sense for you to go adding all the values one at a time, like we've done before. If you had 10 values to add, the more concise way of doing it and the more efficient way of doing it is using sum function, which we looked at last time. But we'll do a summary of the formulas in a short while. So we have, this is how we are working out percentages. Okay, we've looked at two ways. You could write the percentages directly into the formula, or you could have them somewhere on the side. Then the computer or the Excel, the spreadsheet, will pick them directly from the range where that rate is indicated, right? So suppose if we think of things like VAT rates, different rates of different things. You can have the rate indicated in a specific portion of the spreadsheet. Then you will just need to click on that position, and then you will apply it, include it in your formula. Now, the net, let's do the net. This is simple math. So we will add the all income, everything that is coming in, then subtract the taxes. So we will need to do the sum of those two minus the tax. One way to do it is just do it directly, that plus that. Then you say minus this, and we have an answer. So it keeps highlighting all the way because I have some data there. So I will move this down. So we've looked at percentages. Yeah, it's not a very complex idea. We have also done a bit of a recap on formatting, and I've used the sum function here at least once. So these are things that will keep popping up. Now, a bit of some more formula. Let me move this out of the way. Some more formula. We now want to do a small analysis of this data that we have here. We want, for example, to count the number of people, get some data out of this spreadsheet. This is just a small sample. Suppose we had a spreadsheet with 1,000 people. We could be counting the number. We could do a bit of a summary of the data by getting the number of people in each department, maybe average age, if we had some age column here, average pay, and so forth. So let me bold this one. Then I can merge and center this section. Okay, so merge and center is something we did not mention. It is used to merge several cells. So I want the whole of this section to be called analysis. Then I can bold, or rather I can apply some borders to it, so it looks more presentable. Okay, you can do all sorts of things in terms of formatting. So I think what we'll do is we'll take one of the lessons and just focus on formatting, because it's an important aspect of this. All right, so we want to count the number of people in marketing. Count the number of people in marketing. Based on the functions we learned last lesson, can anybody remember any function we can use for this? We want to know the number of people in marketing. based on this. We want to use a function that will check this place, and then it will give us the number of people here. Anyone remembers? Can post something on chat or say it out loud. So that would be the COUNTIF function. So we want equals COUNTIF. You remember we say these are conditional formulas. We want to check this range, select range. Nice thing is that it also gives you a prompt there. So we want to check that range. And what are we checking for? We're checking for something called marketing. Whenever we are typing text, we have to include speech marks. So if I do that, it will tell me from that range, it is finding two people in marketing, right? Now, there is a temptation to pull this down, to just autofill this. If I do that, then obviously there's something wrong with that data. The way to tell what is wrong with it is to actually look, if I move this out of the way and looked at the formula that is giving me this, the first one is doing the right thing, which is checking range D2 to D13, which is the range I want, for the word marketing. If I go to the second one, it has moved to, it is checking the range D3 to D14. Okay, so it has moved one step down, and it is still looking for marketing. So I need to update two things. I need to update the range. So it takes us back to the idea of absolute reference. So I want this range to be fixed where it is looking for these things, right? So I need to apply absolute referencing to that section. So I will highlight it and then press F4, right? So that fixes one of the problems. So now if I autofill this one, I'll get 2 all through because it is looking in the correct range all through, but it is looking for marketing all through as well. So I need to update what it is looking for. So I can do that quickly by just typing in what it is supposed to look for. So for this section, it should tell me how many people are in cleaning, how many people are in HR, how many people are in IT. So I'm just updating the criteria for what it's supposed to be looking for. Then there will be sales. Sales. Then we have support as the last one. So what you notice, this is linked to this. So if I change any values here, so for example, if I have more people, let's say I switch, let me change one person from support, and let me just, or let's change from cleaning and let's call it support. You'll see, we'll update that. So there's no longer anyone in cleaning, they're now called support. Okay, so same thing, if I updated one of these sales to HR, the data will automatically pick the change. So there will now be 3 HR, and there will be less, the one I reduced, less sales, right? So I didn't have any age here, so I will leave this out, or I can quickly, actually it's part of what we can do. Suppose we wanted to insert age here. We already have these columns. How do we add a new column? How do we insert a new column? We can insert a new column by just right-clicking just after where we want the new column. I want a column here called age, so I will right-click there and insert. Then I get a blank column and I can say age. Then I can put some random figures. Let me just pick some random numbers. 33. So these are people working for that company. What organization it is. We have a few people above 40, people in the 20s, and so forth. So we can decide to include that in some kind of analysis. So suppose we want to get the average age of people in marketing. For whatever reason, we want to collect some bit of demographic information. So we can use a function we used last time. So we can use average if. Okay. So we are looking at a department, then we will average the age. Let me switch this to. It does look like the numbers. It will look more natural if I switch this. Yeah. So notice what I've done. Let me just repeat that exercise. Suppose I wanted to swap this. What I've done there is selected this, copy, Control C, and I've just gone where I want it and done that. I used this, right clicked, and insert copied cells. Okay, then I will need to delete this. So what I've done there is insert copied cells. The only problem that creates is the range for this now becomes wrong. So I need to reselect this. So let me do this quickly. So highlight that the range was this. I needed to press F4. That should fix the formula. Okay, back to what we were doing. We were trying to, no, it doesn't fix it completely. I still have the problem of needing to change this. Let me use a shortcut for this. I can use this. So it will check for K16 there. This will check for sales. I'm using absolute reference even for this section. In other words, even this, it will just look for support all through. In IT, instead of typing it there, I just reference it this way, and then I press F4 so that it will look for the whole range for the same thing, amounts, correct numbers, right? So we were trying to get average age. So we kind of updated our worksheet here to include age. So what we want to do is to get the average age by department, right? So we will need a function for that. We will use it's called a conditional function again. So we will do equals average if. Okay, so, and you will notice this one has 3 variables we need to insert there, 3 parameters. Okay, so we want to check here. We are looking at this section, and we are looking for people in marketing. So we want again to fix, let's just fix this. Remember that thing we talked about, absolute reference. We can do it right now so that we do the absolute reference this because we will be using the same range all along. Then we press that, then click on marketing, or we could write marketing, but let's go with clicking on it. So it will be looking at that range, searching for marketing, and what will it be averaging? So if you look at that, the template that was there, it asks us the average range, which is this thing here, average range. So in other words, say where you're looking, what you're looking for, and what will you be calculating. Okay, and then we want this also absolute with an absolute. So if I do that, it gives me an average age of 30.5 for people in marketing. So if I look at those 2 people, it's 28 plus 33. What it has done is that it has added those 2 and divided by 2. Okay, so just to review that formula a bit. Let me zoom it in. The font a bit so you can see it better. If I did that, then move this a little bit. So it is average if. This refers to the range where I'm getting the category of people I'm looking at. I'm looking at the departments, and then what am I looking for? This is a specific department I'm looking for in this range. In the range D2 up to D13, I'm looking for. This was referring to marketing. Sorry that I've not written the name this time round. Then this is what I am averaging. This E2 to E13 is where I am doing the calculation. So it has three parameters: the range where I am looking, what I'm looking for, and the calculation, the range which I will use for the calculation. Average if, and it works very similarly to sum if. If we wanted, for example, to get the sum, how much you're spending on each department on pay, yeah, we could include a sum here. But we can include that here. Let's just add it here, sum or total for the department. So you spending pay for that department. Okay, but let's do average first. Suppose we wanted average pay. It's very similar. It's only that this time we will be doing the pay instead of the age. So if I already have the formula here, one thing I can do is just copy the formula over. Okay, you will notice it just writes 30.5 because everything here is frozen. So it is looking in the same range, it is looking for the same thing, and it is averaging the same thing. The same thing here is, if you look at that, that was the age. It even highlights it here. So what we want to do is to change that last one to, let's say we are averaging the net pay. It's just that last range I will change. And again, use F4, press enter, then it will tell me the average pay for those. For this will be, the first one will be correct because it's for marketing, but if you notice, we have not changed this, so it will be doing marketing all through. So we have to remember to update this one as well. Where it is looking, the criteria. So we need to do this, light it, click on this support, and so forth. So the one way I could have avoided this is to could have copied everything across. So if I did this, let's see, we had done K15, we had updated this. Anyway, let's quickly update this one. Control Y. Okay, so let me change this to not fix this. Yeah, I'm thinking through this formula. I think I don't need to fix this one. I want it to change as I copy it downwards. So I will do that and it will give me the right fix now. So what it is doing, let's see if this is correct. So it has checked in K15. This one has checked in K16. This one has checked in K17, and it was checked in K18, K19, and then there is no one in cleaning, so it is not finding any data. It has not found anything called cleaning. Now we don't want this to happen, so we can improve our formula to avoid seeing hashes. We can use if there is no result, then we get a 0 or something like that, but that will complicate the formula. But we can modify this to apply what is called error handling. Like if it is, there is an error, then it puts a 0. You can use something called if error. Then we say 0. Now that makes the formula rather long, but what it does is, this is what we are using, but we are saying if this generates an error, it will put a 0. Yeah, that's what it does. It's used for error handling. If there is an error in this formula, it will put a 0 instead of having those hashes, or you can have another form of error message, right? So what I want to do is to copy this across. So with spreadsheet questions, sometimes you have to do some thinking, even when you know it very well, like we have just discovered here. I was freezing this range, which I think I didn't need to. I wanted it, ideally it should be changing. As I scroll down, it should be moving from this one to this automatically. So that saves me the work of typing the departments. Like I type marketing, then type support. It makes it a very long process. Let's see, I'm too fast. Eh? All right, I will slow down, Joroge. So what I'm saying is, this average if, did you understand? I hope you understood what average if does. Average if calculates the average of a given range, but based on a condition. So like we are getting the average age by department. That is why we are using average if. We are not just getting the average of the whole set of data. We are getting the average by department using some criteria. Average pay, we will be getting, again, the average by department. So we will still, in this case, use average if. So let me repeat the average if. I see, that's correct. Okay, so average if. So I'll start with an equal sign, right? So average if, I will just write the function, right? Then I will look at this prompt here, or this template. It tells me to provide a range. Where am I looking? I'm looking at the department. So I have fulfilled that first criteria. Okay. Then to make this, to lock this range, because I don't want this to change. I want to look in the same range every time. I press in on my computer, because I'm using a laptop, I will press FN. FN is a function key somewhere at the bottom left of the keyboard. Then that will allow me to select the function keys up at the top of the keyboard. But that is only for a keyboard. If you're using a desk, or rather for a laptop, if you're using a desktop, you might not need to press the function key. So it will have a slightly different format, that keyboard. But I imagine most of you probably will be using a laptop. So it will be FN, then F4. You hold down the FN key at the bottom, F4 at the top. That locks the range. Then we said for this range, you don't need to lock. Then what am I averaging? This time round, I am doing the net pay. Okay, so this is the average range. The range I need to do the calculation on. So I can quickly run through that. I am looking here. This will have the list of departments. This will tell me what I'm looking for, the K15. Then I will get the average. When I find marketing, do the average for marketing. When I find support, I do the average for support. Again, I want to lock this. So FN plus F4, and I get my figures here. The formatting, again, I need to make this 16. Now this division by 0 is an error, so I can use error handling to cover that. Because there is no cleaning, what it is doing is, it is because it's an average, you know, average is, it will take the total number of items, then divide by the number of items there are. So in other words, it will count, there is 0 cleaning people, but then it will divide that by 0. And if you divide things by 0 in maths, you get an error. So what I will do there is apply some error handling. So notice I'm not changing the formula too much. I'm just adding, if there is an error, if error, then what will happen? I'll put a comma here at the end, and I will put either error or 0. You could even write the word error if you wanted to, but we don't want appearing. Let's just say 0, because the average pay is 0 if there's 0 people. That is, or you can have any other error message. If I did this, I'll get the word error. Okay, so hope that makes sense. So if error sometimes is quite useful for coping with any unexpected things happen. Okay, so I can either put an error. For example, if somebody entered, instead of entering an age here, they entered something like 29. So if they did that, then probably it will have a problem calculating, although in this case it has not generated any error. It would, in other cases, you can tell that this has changed. Something has changed here because it has not taken this text into account. So it is 28.5 in reality because it cannot calculate using text. All right, so that is a bit of a few more functions. I've gone through average if again. So we had said we can do sum if. The logic is the same. Suppose we want to get the sum of the pay by department. Okay, so it's same logic, except that this time around we are doing the sum. Okay, so these functions, I know they start getting a bit more intimidating as you go along, but once the logic of it clicks, then you will see it's not a very hard function. So what we want to do is to tell how much are we paying the people in marketing, how much are we paying the people, how much are we spending on the people in IT. Okay, so it's kind of a realistic analysis what we want to do. So I want to do sum if this time. Okay, so I'm still looking at departments. Then I will do the FN and F4 to lock that range. Then what am I looking at? I'm still looking by department. Okay, then I will put a comma. And what am I summing this time? Still the net pay. So we want to know in total how much are we actually spending on these people. So I lock that range and I close the bracket. So it will give me the totals by department. So let me increase the font of this. And it will tell me marketing people, we spent 3,003. Let's see. Oh, that is these two figures. I was looking at this and wondering. Which says, so it is this plus that. Because we have used the net range. Support people, we have spent in total 8. Let me copy this down. We spent in total 1,794. So in other words, it has looked for support. It has added that to that. Give me the sum for that department. Okay, so it's a very useful function depending on what you're trying to look for. Very useful function for summarizing data or analyzing data. So that's a few more functions. What I wanted to do also here is, let me see. So what I wanted to do is to also use some other set of data to talk a little bit more about, just summarize the functions and the formulas some more. Let's look at a different set of data. So suppose I had this data here. Okay, this is a long set of data. I can use it also to do some of the same things. So this is a summary of the different formulas, some of the ones we did last time. So you know how to, this is addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So quickly running through that. Addition, suppose we wanted to add quantities, we said this one we just add directly or subtract. So this one we will not dwell on. Subtraction, you just use a minus sign. But average, again, suppose we wanted to get the average quantity. These are it's a very long list. What I wanted to use this to show you also is, suppose I had a very long range to select. If I do this and I want to get the average of all these figures up to the bottom, this spreadsheet has about 2,000 different records. So one way I could do it is drag this down up to the bottom, keep going all the way up to the number 2,000, which is quite a long journey. So what I'll do instead is, on the keyboard, I'll hold Control and Shift. Control and Shift down, then I press the down arrow. Control Shift down arrow. So that's a shortcut. It selects the whole range. If you think about it, look at this. It keeps going. It's actually not 2,000, it is 89,522. So it's a lot of data. So it would have not made sense for me to try and scroll down all the way. Okay, so Control Shift down arrow, it selects the entire column. Okay, so that makes my work easier. So I will not need to scroll all the way. Let me do this quickly. If that automatically selects the correct range, then I can go back to the top. And if I press enter, the average of all these values is 12.9. Okay, so in very few strokes, you've been able to kind of analyze a lot of data. Remember, we've seen these are 80-something thousand records. So, but the average of all these quantities is 12.89. Okay, so suppose I wanted to do a sum of all these things that are in this column. I can still use the sum function equals sum. We've come across these simple functions before, so it's just a bit of a summary together with shortcuts. So if I do that, I am assured, I don't even have to check, I am assured that it has gone up to the bottom, but I've just used Control, Shift, and down arrow. Then when I come here, use the bracket, center, then the sum of all this is 1,930,000 something. Okay, so that is another two things. One, a shortcut and a review of the sum function. Sum if we have just looked at, we have said sum if is a conditional calculation. So we are summing things that meet a certain condition. So suppose we wanted to use to sum things that where the quantity is, let's see what would make sense here. We want to count things where the quantity is above 20, for example. Okay, that's count if. Suppose we want to count the items, whatever these products were, products where the quantity sold was above 20. So we can do count if equals count if. So we're counting the products. So again, Control Shift, press down, select everything. We want to see categories where the sales were above 20. So I will lock that using the absolute referencing we talked about. Then I put a comma. Then I will, this is what I want to count. Criteria where this is above 20. Now that introduces an interesting twist. See, in the other case, we were just counting things. There were marketing, there were departments, there were text. So how do we count something that is greater than, is less than? We have to use a formula. So we say greater than 20. It is counting. So I need to change this range actually. It should be, it is counting range D where the item is greater than, number of items is greater than 20. So I've looked in this range, and out of these 89,000 and something products, 12,373 of them had a quantity of above 20. Okay. So it kind of simplifies. It would be a very hard thing to look through the list and determine the ones that are above 20, but the formula does it for you in a few seconds. So looking at that again, I specify the range in where I'm looking and the criteria. So the criteria we've seen this time round, if we are talking about something that is greater than a certain number or less than a certain number, your criteria has to be in numerical form this way, but it still has the speech marks. So it is looking in this range for things that are above 20. Right? Now, so let's walk through this one. Sum if, in this case, again, we can look for a field where we can sum. So suppose we want to sum with a condition. So we want to sum, there is this, if you look at the order number, there are different orders here. Let's use the order number. So suppose we want to sum the quantities just for the order number 53,993. Okay, that would make sense. So that equals sum if, then this is the range I'm looking at. So these are sorted, but in some cases they might not have been sorted. So then I want to use the criteria, this one. So the idea is I will sum those things that are, give me a minute, a second please. Sum if I was checking this range, the order number, and I'm using 53,993 as our criteria. And what am I summing? Let me sum the item totals or the quantity. Let me use the quantity. So I will keep this open, keep this here, then I will do the item totals. So in this case, I just want this to be fixed. So I'll press F4, then I will get the total. Then lock the range, the center. So what it has done there, it has counted the total of the items that meet this criteria. So my criteria in this case, it is 5393. The order 5393, the total quantity of things is 171. The only problem is that it has again put some decimals. If I'm counting things, I probably don't want decimals. This has to do with formatting, which we looked at a bit of last time. You can reduce the decimals because it's just a number, it is not currency. So we use that and it gives me, it has given me the sum of these things. So these have been sorted, but in reality, sometimes they might all be mixed up. So you might need to pick them from different positions in that range. Okay, so that's sum if. Count simply counts. So this one is not a complicated. If I just wanted to count how many items are in this range, if I use count, let's see if it will count for us. So it should give us the actual number of items. If I do that, let's enter. It should give me the count of everything. So simply count the range. It tells me there are 89,521 items. Okay, so it has just counted everything in that range. Okay. Count A, on the other hand, count A is related to count, but count A specifically counts things that are text. Okay, so if I had now the names of people, let me see if I had some names of people in our initial, in the worksheet we were using before. Let me go back to it. So if I want to just simply count the total number of people here, then I can do equals, if I use count, see what will come through. Look at that. When I use count, it gives me a 0 because this is text. But for me to count things that are text, I use count A, count A. Okay, so it has the word count and an A at the end. So it is used for counting things that are not numbers. All this is different functions. Okay, so what I was doing here is giving you a bit of a summary of some functions. So what we can count in this worksheet is probably these things. These are the only things we can count using count A. If we did count A equals, and I did count A, then open a bracket, then I use this range. I expect to see the same number as this other one, because this time round here I was counting the order number, here I was counting the product description. Those two should match because one of them is the order number, this is the description of the same the item matching that order number. Small distinction there. Count only counts numerical values. Count A counts text. Now, I'll just do these ones quickly. Then I will not do VLOOKUP today. It's a relatively more advanced one, but I will do it at some point. But let's look at the if function again. So suppose I want to use the if function to come up with a name of the category. So those sales that are above 50, for example, I will call them high sales. And sales that are below 50, well, let's use 30, for example. Sales above 30 are high, sales below 30 are low. So I can use a function, an if function. So I'll do something like this, equals if this quantity is above 30 is what we have used. So if this is greater than or equal to 30, then this is high. Consider that a high sale. Else, a low sale. So this if function in this case has only two possible outcomes. So it has a condition. If that condition is true, it will write that. If the condition is false, it will write that. So I'm putting some two categories based on the quantity here. So if I do that and autofill, lots of things are below 30. Did I say 30? Or if it is equal, greater than 30, then it is high. If it is below 30, it should be writing low. Oh yeah, I'm using the quantity. This is what I'm looking at. So if you look at all these, they are below 30, then this 60 is above 30, it has written a high. Then I can even use another function to calculate, to count how many, suppose I wanted to count how many things are high sales. So I can use high sale numbers for further analysis. High sale number. Then I can use one of the functions that we have already learned to count how many items had high sales. You can use equals count if, then I use this to select that range. Then the criteria there, I can say high. It can tell me how many had high sales. So it is 5,643. Okay. But if I just try to judge it by scrolling down, already it seems like there are too many low sales. But remember, these are 80,000 plus things. So it means out of those 80,000, there is about 5,000 of them that have the word high on them. Okay. So that kind of just reinforces the idea that a spreadsheet is very useful for working with lots of data that would be unrealistic for you to try and analyze as with your bare hands without an additional tool. Okay, so high sales are those, and I've used COUNTIF again. Okay, now that kind of summarizes the if function. The if function is used when you want to apply a condition to something. What I will end with is I will go back to this worksheet and just demonstrate one more use of the if function. I just use the if function here. Suppose these allowances remember we had a fixed figure. We say the allowance is just 20%. But in reality, sometimes the allowances are given depending on your income or depending on some other condition. Same as taxes. People are in different tax brackets and so forth. So we can apply some condition even when doing these calculations. So let's use an if function for the allowance. We will say people earning more get a bigger allowance, and people earning less and a smaller allowance. So this 20% will keep it for people earning below $1,500, and people earning above $1,500 will get, let's give them a little more, we give them 30%. Okay, so this allowance has two categories. There's two categories of the allowance. One group is getting 30%, another group is getting 16%. How do we include that in our calculation here? Now, we will hopefully make a recording of this available for you. I know sometimes it's too much to take in, but we will make this recording available for you at some point. So we say, because I want to use if to calculate the allowance, we're saying if this pay is above or equal to, we're saying 1,500, then the allowance is 30%. And it is 30% of what? It has to be 30% of this. We have to specify it, 30% of what? Then 20% of. So two conditions. If the pay is above 1,500, it is, the allowance is 30%. We have to specify of what. If I just wrote 30% without that number there, let's see what it would do. It will write 0.3. 0.3 is because we have not told it it's 30% of what. We have to say it is 30% of the basic pay. The other people who don't meet that criteria will be 20% of the basic pay. So if I do this now, I have used a conditional formula to apply to give allowances. It is not a blanket percentage for everyone. Okay, and we can use a similar thing. In reality, you might have different people being taxed differently depending on how much they are earning as their basic pay. So you will have that somewhere on a table, the different ranges of tax brackets. Then you can apply that conditional formula to work out the actual amount, right? So what I want to do is to bring it to a close. I had intended to spend part of this lesson purely talking about keyboard shortcuts, but I think we will have to do that next lesson. So in the next lesson, I will spend less time talking about new formulas and functions. I will spend more time focusing on one of the clear objectives listed on the syllabus is you need to learn some keyboard shortcuts. So in the next lesson, I'll be talking more about some additional keyboard shortcuts. Otherwise, that's quite a bit of Excel to take in. And thank you for being a good audience, and we will see you next lesson.